Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our Be Women weekly webinars to connect, to share, to learn what is important to us. Actually, in these very unique moments, to transform these difficult and challenging times in unique opportunities as a gift to grow, to reimagine our future, to discover our authentic personality and where we want to go professionally, and also as global citizen, what are we going to stand for? So I'm Laura Jadarukoch, a lawyer in the state of New York and Argentina, and very passionate about using businesses and the markets as a force for good to address issues of inequality, gender, and climate. Our webinar today will last 50 minutes, and about the most important skill of today, that is resilience, the superpower of resilience. And our very special guest today, Sule Kutlay Gandur. She is an exceptional presenter on this topic, very passionate about it because it transformed her life. She's an international executive coach, strategic consultant based in Istanbul, and she started in advertising, and now she is for many, many years devoted to working with major companies like Starbucks and other big Turkish in the Turkish market. So Sule is going to address this very important topic that we need very badly today. She's also a YPO Global Network a consultant and speaker, and a TEDx speaker for Berlin 2019. So on this, before I pass you the line to you, Sule, let me share with you about Be Women. Who are we? We are a global network of women entrepreneur and intrapreneur that seek to balance purpose and profits in the markets towards a more caring economy. You heard me right, caring economy, that is an economic system in which we genuinely care for the wellness and fulfillment of people and respect and responsibility for our environment. Sounds great, isn't it? But up to now, we haven't done that. So what we do as a network is we create awareness, inspire specific actions and measurable actions regarding our two burning issues of our society, that are gender and inequality, as well as climate. We collaborate as networks with thousands of women and men worldwide to leave behind the traditions of economic, where there's a few winners and a lot of losers, and move towards a long-term vision of caring economy. On this, a few seconds more about our Be Women empowering move, that is to put your shoulders back, your chin up, your gaze that looks and is bright with determination, and with a super wide smile that lightens our heart. I want everybody smiling, because smiling is the best resilient tool, isn't it, Sule? Sule, the line is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you, Laura. I'll try to deliver up to that introduction. Thank you very much. So I first came across resilience, interestingly, in therapy, out of all the places. And it helped me really turn my midlife crisis into a breakthrough. So since then, I've been trying to share my know-how and experience in resilience with leaders. My mission and passion really is to help leaders deal with change with courage. And that is resilience, really. And courage is a very important value dear to my heart. I know it is for Be Women as well. It's one of their core values and my core values. So our purposes, our values align. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. What better time to talk about resilience than today? Because I think we're almost doing altogether a live demo in resilience. We're going still through an incredible medical, psychological, logistics, and unfortunately, big economic crisis. There's so many questions. You know the term, you're probably familiar with it, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, we're really going through a VUCA today. And the questions keep changing and multiplying every day. I mean, to go through the most basic ones, when will this end? Will it? Will there be a vaccine? Will there be a second wave? How badly will our businesses be hit? How will our businesses and work life be transformed? How will the economy change? How will our social lives change? So on and so forth. So I think with all this change and ambiguity around us, it's a great time to talk about resilience. Let me share my screen with you. Everybody can see it. Laura, you can see it, correct? Give me a thumbs up, Badrak.
We can see it. Thank you.
Excellent. So today, quickly, in about 20-25 minutes, I would like to take you through a journey in resilience. I would like to start by defining resilience, then touch on the science and data on resilience, draw a personal resilience map, as well as a leadership and professional one, give you a simple tool that you can practice on today or in the future to deal with crisis or a sudden change in your life, to ask the right questions, and finally finish by tapping into the superpower of our resilience. Now, as I begin, I would like to ask you, what word jumps up in your mind? What's the first word that comes to your mind when I say resilience? Can you please type that in the chat? I'm really curious. But can I see the chat as I talk? Laura, help me there.
If you're showing,
if I'm sharing, I can't see it.
So I
but you see it, so you can tell me as my co-host.
Drive, tenacity, creativity, agility, strength.
Excellent. Yes. All these are a part of resilience. I find that one of the simplest ways to define resilience is through an analogy with the bamboo tree. Bamboo is quite an interesting plant. It lives almost in all countries and continents around the world, and in all climates. It can withstand a lot of rain or a lot of sunshine and drought. It grows about 9 centimeters per day, so it grows really quickly compared to some other plants. But most importantly, its tensile strength is greater than steel. So you can bend a bamboo all you like, but you simply cannot break it. And that's why it's now being used as building material in earthquake zones. So when we speak about resilience, what we mean is being simply as flexible and therefore enduring as a bamboo tree. Now, in the corporate world, we define resilience as a leader or an organization holding on to its core purpose and integrity despite dramatically changing circumstances. The American Psychological Association defines it as the ability of a person to adapt well in the face of change, trauma, tragedy. And Harvard Business School actually lately defined it as adaptability personified. My favorite definition, again going back to this value of courage, I think it's the courage to look at your reality, your own brutal reality, right in the eye. So if you're standing by this cliff, and if you feel scared, which you might, if you feel a bit dizzy, resilience is having that courage to look at the view. It is having that courage to look into the abyss in your life. And if we have that, if we can tap into that, then that means we can tap into a realism and an optimism, which is at the core and heart of resilience. Today, I'd like to go through, in the interest of time, 3 scientists only, the main 3 scientists who really researched resilience, worked on resilience, and enlarged this concept. The first one is Viktor Frankl. He was a neurologist and a psychiatrist living in Vienna during the Second World War. When Hitler's army entered Austria, he was sent to concentration camps. Consequently, he lost all his family members, but miraculously, he managed to survive. And upon survival, incredible, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. it's more about not a survival story only, it's about a philosophy of survival. He also devised a therapy method called logotherapy out of his experiences. Frankl says when we can no longer change a situation, we are really challenged to change ourselves, and that is at the core and heart of resilience. He talks about a tragic optimism, being able to find meaning despite the tragic circumstances in our lives. He gives examples as to how he did that in the camps when he felt really, really close to death. What he used to imagine was if and when he survived, he would talk about his experiences in classrooms to students. And that he did much later in MIT, Stanford, Oxford, Vienna University, and so on. Now, Aaron Antonovsky is the second scientist and scientific work that I'd like to touch upon. Antonovsky took this realistic optimism concept further. When he was researching the stress adaptation of women to menopause, the effects of menopause on women's health, he found something very interesting. Some of these women in his research group had been through concentration camps, but most of them were just as healthy as their counterparts who had not been through such an experience. Incredible, right? I mean, he was really surprised. So he kept going back and checking and finding other people and repeating the research, but the results were the same. So this led him to ask the big question: if disease and stress occur everywhere all the time, how do we survive despite all these odds? And he came up with his salutogenesis theory. According to Antonovsky, to be healthy physically and mentally means having a sense of coherence. And that is dependent upon three things. The first one is comprehending your circumstances, really understanding what's going on, looking at it realistically. The second one is managing your circumstances by getting help from the right places. That is, using your resources and being resourceful. And thirdly, despite the tragedy, despite the difficulty, sprinkling a bit of hope and making a meaning out of what's happening, these circumstances, together with the good and the bad. Well, you may be asking yourselves, how can we do that when everything is tragic? Especially if you see the glass more empty than full. I'm like that, for example. I'm a pessimist, born pessimist. I always think of the worst case scenario. I always think of the worst thing possible. Well, there is hope. And the third scientist that I'll be talking about proves us that. Emmy Learner is an American developmental psychologist, and she did an amazing, amazing piece of research. She went to the island of Kauai in Hawaii, and she followed 698 children from birth until middle age. And she asked the question, is resilience through nature or nurture? And what she found was it did not matter what these children were born into, good, happy circumstances or bad, disagreeable circumstances like alcoholism, drug abuse, divorce. 1/3 of the children turned into resilient adults, no matter what kind of circumstances they were born into. And the common factor among them, which she calls protective factors, was one, problem solving. They had learned to solve problems on their own somehow. 2, having role models growing up. They had a mentor in their lives, like a mentor or a teacher that they could ask questions to and share things with. 3, they had a sense of helping others and being helped by others. They worked in the community, they went to the church, they fed the poor, they looked after street animals, etc. And finally, they had good empathy and communication skills. They had friends, they kept their friends, they had emotional intelligence. So I think this work, of course, summed up in a nutshell, tells us that resilience is a developmental trait. Resilience is not just bouncing back to the same place. It means growing and changing with change, with trauma, with tragedy, with sudden things changing our lives around. It's because it has both a recovery and a sustainability element in it. And it certainly does not come from our nature, it comes from nurture. That means we can always work on our resilience at any one point in time. And as Frankl and Antonovsky also point out and support, resilience is not goal-oriented or product-oriented thinking. It's process-oriented thinking. You can be less resilient today, more resilient tomorrow. It could depend on the situation. But one thing is for sure, it's lifelong learning, and therefore you can always work on increasing your resilience. Now, before we go any further, and I try to hint at how we can do that and work on it with you together, I'd like to do a quick poll, if I may. Here we go, great. So please pick the top two, okay? That applies to you. Pick the top two that applies to you here. And if you can quickly do that, and we're up to 16 participants, we're a small group today, we can quickly see the results. Right, Laura?
Yep.
Okay. So how many people? Okay, here we go. Well, I face reality even when it's difficult. I ask for help when I need it. I can be flexible and adapt to change. I'm proactive in addressing challenges. I'm hopeful about the future. So which top two describes you the most? Two, four, six, seven. Going one, going twice. Okay. So it's interesting. We have 3 ties, but only 7 people participated. Yeah? Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it lets you choose one. That's the issue.
Oh, it's the issue. I'm sorry. Okay, then you choose the one that applies to you the most. It sometimes happens, technological stuff. Well, as a group, I think we are realistic, we are resourceful, and we are proactive. Flexibility is so-so. Hopefulness, not so great at the moment. Optimism. Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to close that. Some questions that will help you think about these later, these aspects. So obviously the first one was referring to realism, the second one, resourcefulness, the third one, flexibility, the fourth one, proactivity, and the fifth one, optimism. Let's see. So here you see it on the resilience map as well. You can ask yourself, what is my honest reality? And you can also ask yourself, what does my emergency get help map look like in a time of crisis or sudden change? Who can I get help from, when, where, and how? And you can think about it beforehand too, even today or tomorrow, make a map for yourself. How am I stretching my body and my mind? Stretching the body, I think, is important because then it helps you stretch your mind. And by stretching your mind, I mean flexible thinking. How are you making new and creative connections that you haven't seen before? And then you can ask yourself on the proactivity front, what is the one thing I'm preparing for in my personal or professional life, as opposed to just being reactive to things happening? And finally, what does give me hope in life? And then you can increase the dosage of it in your life, whatever gives you hope or a sense of optimism despite everything. At Harvard, this is the crisis that this is the advice that they're giving leaders in a crisis. They're saying, first, I really liked it, so I'm quoting them, be brutally honest. Be brutally honest to yourself, to your coworkers, to your team, to your company. And 2, be rational, so realistic and rational, but also a bit emotional and hopeful. And what is this but realistic optimism and resilience, really? There's something I really believe strongly in, and I think I share that with Laura and probably most of you. Who you are determines how you lead. Who you are determines how you lead. That's why we have been talking about caring leadership. That's why we have been talking about authentic leadership and resilience a lot lately, and especially during this crisis. And I think the principles of resilience, be it we're talking at the personal level, the professional level, or the organizational level, are one and the same. Now, we touched on the personal resilience map a little bit. And so I would like to take you through the same map with a business mindset this time. So we talked about realism, being having a brutal honesty and really seeing your circumstances, understanding them well. Well, with that comes the question, what is in my control to change? And what do I need to simply accept because I can't change? In the business world, this is known as the famous Stockdale Paradox. When Jim Collins was writing his book, Good to Great, he was talking to Admiral Stockdale, who fought in the Vietnam War, and he was an admiral in the US Army. And he said to Collins, "You're wrong. The optimists are not the resilient people. The pessimists actually are more resilient, because in Vietnam, this is what I experienced. Those people who were really optimistic and said, oh, they're going to come save me in a month, I'm going to be out of here in no time, actually died of broken hearts because their expectations were not met. Their unrealistic expectations were not met. But those people who said, all right, I can be here for a long time. It is clear that I'll be tortured almost to death, even to death, and I may easily die, but there's a slim chance that I may survive, actually made it through. So personal life, professional life, doesn't matter. Realism. What do I need to change? What do I need to accept? What can I change? The second aspect is proactivity. So this means really using your resources that are available to you, and not just being reactive, but taking responsibility of what's happening and trying to prepare for it. I know that COVID-19 caught us all by surprise, and some of it, there was no way we could have had a proactivity plan on. However, if we look around us, there are countries and leaders and companies who were more proactive than others. Some were just reactive, some were more proactive. I still think Germany was a good example in proactivity. Their leader, Merkel, is a scientist. She's a trained scientist, so she was very calm, she was very factual, she was very reassuring, and she was very authentic and open with her people. They started testing really early, and they started testing a lot. When they saw, for example, in one small town, one school, somebody got sick, they rushed over there. They tested like 600 people, the kids in the school and the people who worked at the school. And then they separated the sick from the healthy at the time. And they did this everywhere and very quickly. They took lots of proactive measures to increase their capacity of ventilators and emergency and intensive care units. And they started testing for immunity quite early. So they're one of the good examples. The key point to take from here is being proactive. What can I proactively think about and prepare for? The third thing is being flexible, making new connections, thinking in a new way, and improvising. This doesn't mean having no discipline. By all means, continue your discipline. It's going to help you. But try to improvise at the same time. Now, I saw that some companies, again, were much better at doing that, and some leaders versus others in COVID. For example, Smirnoff and Bacardi, as alcoholic beverage producers, immediately started either donating their alcohol or making hand sanitizers from alcohol in their own factories. Mercedes-Benz, a very, very disciplined, top-notch country, was flexible enough in the UK to produce ventilators from automotive parts. Tesla in the US. Arçelik is a Turkish big white manufacturer's good company. And I know them quite well. I worked with them, and my friend, good friend, is the head of marketing there. She's the CMO. And they separated a team of engineers early on when everything started in China. They have factories in China as well. And these engineers just lived in the factory and started working on how to produce a ventilator model. And they did. And now lots of local hospitals are using archaic ventilators. So flexibility and improvisation. And finally, adding a bit of hope. I know Bill Gates has been a controversial figure of late, but I choose to look at it from the optimistic side, and I see his philanthropism as well. So when COVID-19 started, he was talking to us about putting things in perspective, being realistic about the facts and about how huge a medical crisis this is, but keeping it in perspective in the sense that this was going to statistically, and it is happening that way, kill less people than smallpox. And he donated lots of efforts to support the cause of finding a cure or a preventive cure and so on. So adding a bit of hope on top of your realism to find meaning in the circumstances. Now, how many people are we at, Laura? 15. Good. Laura told me in her experience, when we go into breakout rooms and start discussing things one-on-one, in Paris, for example, people tend to log off and leave. But I don't want you to do that. So I would like to have a poll and see. This is the model I'm going to talk about. I can either continue talking, or I can talk a little bit about this tool that I'd like to share with you, and you can go into breakout rooms to practice it. What is your preference? So let's be democratic about it, I thought, and keep you all that way with us to discuss and ask questions. So tell me if you would like to use this model, which I'm going to go through now, in breakout rooms or not. You can write in the chat if you like also. What is the verdict?
Well,
as you think about it, I'll start going through the model. So it's quite a simple one, but it's based on adult learning theory and also Columbia University's model of coaching, which I was a part of and I'm still a part of. So context of change, asking the question of what's up, what's in my power to change and influence, what do I need to simply accept and move on with? So defining our boundaries of influence and acceptance within the context of change. And then looking at what matters, the content in our lives with curiosity, with curious eyes. So what are my priorities? Where are my resources? And how can I align them? I focused on what I could accept and change. How can I align my priorities and resources? And finally, what's next? Conducting your life with courage. What is the one lesson that I can take from here? What is the insight I'm seeing? What can I take into the future? How am I changing? What is my foresight? So the questions to ask here would be, what do you accept? What will you try to change? What is important to you? And who, what, where can you get help from on that? And what's the one lesson you're taking away? Where's the growth? So are we going into breakout rooms, my co-host, or not?
no, my computer's stuck, so I can't go in.
Oh, look at that. So we can't go into breakout rooms.
We can't. My computer.
Okay. So this is, since we're not that many people, I'm going to pause here for a second and ask you if you have any questions about the model or what I have talked about so far. You can either type them in the chat, and I think Laura can see it, right?
No, I can't.
No, you can't. Then I stop sharing for a second and I can see the chat. Still would love to practice somehow. Oh, sorry, the poll has not been launched. Big group, yes, big group. Carry on, we are a small group. I'm good with the model presentation. Well, since we can't go into breakout rooms, sorry to disappoint those who wanted to, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any, please, or if you choose to type it in the chat, I will see it.
I think a problem I would have is
Yes.
how to. Hello, I'm Daniela.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, now I can much better. Excellent. Ooh, Daniela, you keep cutting off.
I think it's better.
Would you like to type your question in the chat? Okay, Parag is, Daniela, could you please type your question in the chat? And if your voice comes back, I'd be happy to chat with you. Parag, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, is asking, I'm curious about cultural aspects of how people react, as the response from different cultures would be drastically different. And is it possible to use a practical example to demonstrate the tool you just introduced? Okay, first, cultural aspects. Well, I think some cultures, you're right, as the Parag, some cultures like Mediterranean cultures tend to be more emotional, more reactive as opposed to proactive perhaps, and at times less realistic. Whereas other cultures may be a lot more calm, collected, and disciplined in terms of emotional control, because a part of resilience is also about emotional control when you're facing a crisis. However, I think any culture or any person from any culture is able to work on their resilience at any given time by asking certain questions and trying to answer them and getting help on various issues or parts of the resilience model that they're struggling with. Now, in terms of a practical example to demonstrate, well, I'm going to start sharing my screen again for a second. And I'll tell you about my experience with COVID personally in light of this model and see if that helps. We talk about realism, a crude, brutal, honest realism. So when this happened, it took me a couple of days to adjust, but I asked myself, okay, what's going on here? And so after I read the medical facts and I understood it a bit further, even though there were differing opinions, I understood and accepted, really accepted this fact that each one of us is going to catch this virus one day or another. And the later, the better, versus sooner, really, because now we know more and later we will know more about it. And life is going to be different for the next year. Medically, logistically, economically, but there are ways to adjust. So what I need to accept is this medical crisis and its harsh facts, and the fact that I will lose loved ones for sure, and I have, to COVID-19, and I may catch it as well, and I simply don't know how my body is going to react to it, because I had a friend who was 55 years old who stayed in the ICU for 5 weeks, and I have others who just drank lemon tea and got well, and I could be either. But the next question comes, what can I try to change? So I can try to change my attitude. I can try to be less anxious. I can try to change my work life around to adapt to it, which I think most of us did. And then I ask myself, where can I get help from? The resourcefulness bit. You know, what is important to me? My health is important to me. My family life is important to me. And my career is very important to me. So about my health, I took all the precautions that I could. About my family and mother, I took all the precautions, medical ones that I could. But in terms of my career and my mental health, I started getting help. So I started talking to a friend who was a psychiatrist once a week for an hour to keep my anxiety in check and to keep things in perspective. I have two doctor friends, one in Istanbul and one in New York, and I started talking to them about first once a week, then about every 2 weeks to every month, to make sure that I have a good medical perspective on the matter. And because I wasn't very much in tune with all the digital facts and tools that are available to me, I got myself immediately a digital mentor. And so I have started working with that person to be more digitally fluent. And I have tapped into my resources to work on what's important to me, my mental health, so I could support other people in my family in the right way, and my career, and I got the right help. What's the one lesson I'm taking away from all this? I think the one lesson I'm taking away from all this is that your purpose and your passion, knowing that, tapping into that, can keep you going through tough times, really tough times. And if you don't know it, it's good to start thinking about it. What is my purpose in life? And start going on that purpose quest. If you do know it, it's good to start going at it in a more passionate or deeper manner. So my passion is leadership coaching and consulting, and basically sharing my experiences and my know-how with other people through the means of coaching, and that's what I'm doing more and more these days. Let me stop sharing for another second and see, is resilience related with the stages of grief? Well, I'm sorry, Laura?
Yeah, now my computer is back, so I can ask you questions and things like that.
All right, great. But since we didn't go into breakout rooms, I was taking questions, and no, it is not exactly related to the stages of grief, I find. And I'm not sure whether these stages of grief, denial, acceptance, and depression, and going back up from there, etc., is the way that everybody deals with it, in my opinion. People deal with grief differently, and people are resilient differently according to where they're at in their lives and what's happening. So my answer, a simple answer, would be no.
And so then resilience between
Laura, before we go into further questions, if there are no big questions in the chat, can I just wrap up first with the last bit, and then we can go into questions quickly. So I think resilience, all in all, is about a balance as well. It's a balance of realism and optimism, reactivity and proactivity, flexibility and discipline, and this realistic optimism, which is at the heart and core of resilience, is something I hope you take away with and think about, because everybody's dose and everybody's balance is different. But this was the realistic and quite pessimistic pictures from COVID-19. And these were the more optimistic and hopeful pictures from COVID-19. But when I ask myself, be it in COVID-19 or in any other situation, who's the most resilient person or people I know, I always answer children. Children are quite flexible. Huh? They fall down, they quickly get back up. They will ask you the most ridiculous, however, the most creative questions. They will, most of them will not be scared. They will just go for things. And I think this is related to partially the prefrontal cortex. There is a part of our brain right behind the forehead called the prefrontal cortex. And it's like the CEO of our brain. Yeah. And it basically gathers information from all the senses and turns it into logical action for us. So if we inhibit ourselves not to do stupid things and do more intelligent things, then it is thanks to our prefrontal cortex. Or if we set a goal and perform and go for it, it's thanks to our prefrontal cortex. I call this ages and stages. And I think this is across the cultures and across, it's like a universal chart for all of us. In childhood, our prefrontal cortex develops and it completes its maturation by age 21. So our self-esteem develops as well, and we start going after our goals and we start performing. And we look for our partners and pick the right partners and pick the right jobs and careers. And then our emotional body becomes complete. And then there's kids and parenting, possibly for some of us. By midlife, we start asking, what have I done so far? And what have I not done so far? That's why we call it a breakdown or a breakthrough usually in midlife. And according to the answers we give, we may go through a transformation, a partner change, a job change, a career transformation, so on and so forth, and we continue. Around our 50s, the big question starts, who am I now? And what legacy do I want to leave behind? What is my purpose in life? And we start going on our purpose quests. And again, we go after life with a renewed, particularly intellectual and mental energy. And then comes aging and slowing down slowly, and the cycle is completed. No matter at age or stage, we're facing a crisis or a big change. I think it would really help to tap into the childlike spirit in all of us. And by that, I mean, like, look at these answers the kids give on some of the test questions. This one's very relevant for today. What do we call the signs of classifying living things? Racism was the answer. So can you find the X in terms of how many centimeters it is? And a kid circled it and said, here it is. Or would you want to, swim with this guy in the water? No, because there's trash in the water and he's quite chubby. So they're very honest. They're also brutally honest. In other words, my biggest takeaway for me to tap into the superpower of resilience, which I believe exists in all of us, is to be as carefree as a child, as curious as a child, as courageous as a child. Because I think the childlike spirit, as we grow up, takes a bit of a backstage role. So it's good to try to bring that back into the light, to be more resilient in life. And that's how I'd like to finish on that note. And we can move into questions if you like.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sule. This has been really very inspiring, and
You're welcome.
A lot of very interesting information. So can we start with a very practical question that I've read just now? That what is the one thing that we can do tomorrow or today itself to increase our resilience at home and work? What are your best tools that you've learned so far?
Well, I think, again, I'm going to say the core concept of resilience, which is realistic optimism. So ask yourself, what is my reality? Sit down and write it as if you're writing a journal. What is my reality? Break it down and really understand it. Then ask yourself, what are my resources? Who can help me? Because I think we forget to sometimes ask for help, or we ignore the help, or we don't tap into it. But when we really think about it, then we know who can help us, not just help us, but help us effectively, efficiently, quickly, in an agile manner. And finally, ask yourself, where does my optimism come from? Does it come from my faith? Does it come from my husband? Does it come from reading poetry? Where does it come from? Does it come from helping my community? And try to increase the dosage of that in your life.
That's very interesting, because there's many people that are meditators, not many, but that do mindfulness, do meditation, internal work. And how does it compare to resilience as a tool to improve your to have a better life?
Well, mindfulness is, in its simplest form, just being here and being in this moment and being aware of what's going on actively. So if we're having a conversation, I'm here with all my thoughts, as well as physically. My mind is open and I'm really listening to you. I'm also looking at you. I'm actively listening to you, hearing you, seeing you, and so on. And I think the mindfulness practices and meditation practices help us increase this sense of reality, as well as sense of optimism and hope. So definitely helpful tool to become more resilient.
But what about the negative? You know, we have like 60,000 thoughts a day, and we keep always regurgitating, maybe mostly negative.
The loops.
The loop. So how can what tool or technique could you suggest to stop those thoughts, to really focus on the positives? I know you want to be realistic on your situation, on everybody's situation, but how can you improve on your positivity to become more resilient?
That's a great question. But first, I think instead of fighting these thoughts, we should let them pass through. There's this book called The Happiness Trap. The Happiness Trap. And it basically talks about the fact that if we're frantically chasing happiness, it is a trap, because life is not really happy. Life is not meant to be happy, but meaningful. And that comes from the reality of having the good together with the bad. So reminding, I think, yourself of the simple fact when all these thoughts start rushing to your mind, and say, oh, it's only natural that these thoughts are rushing to my mind and I'm thinking them. And yes, the situation in many ways is quite bad. And it's normal that I'm thinking them, may stop you from thinking them more, as opposed to pushing them aside. Another tool is you can look into, we don't have much time to go into this right now, but acceptance and commitment therapy. So accepting what you can't change is a big part of it. When you accept, you let go. And then those negative thoughts that rush to your mind also leave you eventually. I wonder if that answered your question.
Yeah, that was very good. Thank you very much. And I have here a question from Parag. Is resilience more for middle, upper, western, sorry for the divide, as looks like poor, automatically, poor, maybe Parag, you want to explain better your question?
Yeah, why don't you unmute yourself and ask the question, Parag?
It's not clear. Parag, are you there?
So, I have been traveling in India. I have been really looking at people who cannot even earn $1. I have been traveling in the Western countries. In Switzerland, I studied. So I have really seen the cross section of the world. And when I work in disasters, when I work in people with livelihoods, how they earn money, how they survive with even say $10 a month, and still they smile, they are happy, their families are really tied together in a possible way. So I started thinking, that if resilience is being discussed because it is lacking in Western world or the rich world or the middle class world, or like you said in the beginning that it can be nurtured, it can be, a person can be trained. Now I was thinking that if this population exists, which is poor, and they automatically learn it by nature, then do we really need to teach someone about resilience? And what is your experience? Like, is somebody researching about the poor people, the resilience they have, the happiness they have, or the smiles they have? Is there any research like that?
I think there is. I'm not sure whether in particular there is research on the resilience levels versus income, but I do know, and you probably do know as well, that there is a lot of research being done on happiness levels versus your income and socioeconomic status. And I think there are different criteria under happiness, and possibly resilience is one of them. Now, as far as I know, the socioeconomic status can't make you happier, but can take some of your misery away, is what they find. Yeah. So there are certain problems that money can solve for you, but because each one of us is in our brains born in a way to think that the more I have, the more I want, because what I have becomes normal, so I want more. More money or better socioeconomic status does not make people happier. And they're trying to understand the details of it. Another interesting thing they found was that people, after they start, I was listening to this from a Harvard professor last week, their happiness level goes down until the age of 50. This is worldwide research. And then at 50, it reaches sort of an equilibrium, stability, and then it slowly starts rising until you're 70. And then at 70, the population divides into two, and one part of the population worldwide starts going down, and the other one starts going up. So I'll email you the name of the Harvard professors. You may find it interesting to look into their research.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Thank you, Sule.
Sure.
Mariana says she wants to make a comment.
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, how are you? I think we listened to the same webinar from the Harvard Business Professor.
Ah, yes.
And one particular thing that I learned from that webinar that I want to share with all of you is that what he said, actually, an expert in happiness and in the science of happiness, was that you have to divide the socio-economic variable into economic and to social in terms of happiness. And what he said, which was for me very interesting and related to Parag's question, was in terms of economic, money reduces unhappiness, but do not increase happiness. So obviously, to have a certain level of income, you're better off. So you reduce your unhappiness. When you don't have anything to eat, you really have to be unhappy. However, the social part is important for happiness, because the social part, the social equality in a society, it gives you dignity, gives you purpose in life, gives you meaning. You have to have opportunities in front of you, etc. So that really increases the level of happiness when you have these opportunities in life, and you have a more life that is with more dignity. And lastly, what I captured was that sometimes the level of satisfaction is like an equation. It's what you have divided by what you want. Usually in Western societies, people want a lot of things, and they're never happy and they're never satisfied, because what you want can be unlimited. In the Buddhism, in certain societies, usually they are very happy with what they have, and they usually want what they have, and not really, they have what they want and not want what they do not have. So that was very interesting, according to how did it impact happiness and unhappiness.
Yeah.
Well, couldn't be said better. Thank you.
It's not my words. It's something that I just learned
Well,
last
you
Saturday.
contributed it and summarized it very well. Thank you.
We have a few other questions here. Thank you, Mariana. This was really great intervention. And we'll need the name of the professor.
Yeah.
And so, so the very basic question now is, my business is facing ruin. How can I be resilient when there's so much negativity coming at me?
Well, that's a tough one. And again, I think it's good to be realistic. It's good to be realistic in terms of asking yourself, what are the numbers telling me? So how long can I go on? Really look at the financial side of it with your CFO or yourself or an expert, and really stare at those numbers and understand it and accept it, you know. And secondly, also, I think to ask yourself psychologically, how am I doing with this? What is the reality of how am I dealing with it? Because there are so many things that are in your control, and then there are some others that are not. Like if there's a worldwide economic crisis and certain sectors are going to suffer more and certain countries are going to suffer more, no matter what you do, you can't turn that around. So it's good to really face this reality and understand it. Secondly, I think it's very important to tap into your resources. And I think it's the more resources from outside of your work circle, or the family circle, the better it is, because those people are going to be impartial. So getting help from a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a coach would be highly advisable when dealing with such a big crisis. And I think also in terms of financial resources, who you could borrow money from if that's what you wanted to do, who you could partner up with and do something completely different or new or related to what's needed right now in different sectors would be another resourceful question that you can ask.
Well, thank you, Sule. This has been
Thank you.
Very inspiring. And I think that what you brought up is a realistic resilience is very important, because when you're and the question is to understand what is the situation, because we're in such a challenging time with everything that's happening, and it keeps accumulating the totally novel things. But I'm sure that if we do a lot of introspection, we will get to a better resilient status and learn to be more resilient. So on that note, I would like to thank you, Sule, greatly. If you want to say a few closing words, would be great, and then we'll hopefully we can all, while she's saying some closing words, I would like you to, given that this call was very inspiring and there was a lot of very great information about starting from Viktor Frankl and citing of really a lot of interesting positions. Get a pencil and write down at least 3 things that you're going to change, you're going to make a difference, that you're going to act on today in the next 5 minutes based on what you heard from Sule. So Sule, your few closing words, please.
Yes, well, it's been my pleasure to share what I have learned so far on resilience and about life, really, and leadership, and share it with you. Thank you for being such a great audience with your questions and comments, and you were really open. So this has been a mutual pleasure. And one last thing is, please remember that there is the recovery and the sustainability bit in resilience. So resilience is not just bouncing back, but it's changing and growing. It's a process. It's lifelong learning, which is a favorite word for me, a concept. So thank you.
So you know what? We have one burning question from
sure.
Yes, from Maria Teresa. Maria Teresa, do you want to just ask that to close
sure.
the last minutes?
Yes, good morning. I think that being too strong is a problem sometimes because you can survive, you can accept every tough situations, but this is not resilience because you forget your interest, your needs, what you like. And this is a typical women situation. Yes, I am speaking about women of my age in my country. I am not so young. And we are too tough. And I think that being too tough is a problem. I hope I can explain.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. And I completely agree with you. That is why I'm always trying to also talk about the content and the curiosity and who's helping you and where you're getting help from. There are two important things from I heard you say. One was don't try to be too tough and feel your emotions. Share your emotions, express your emotions, even if they're, anger or sadness. There's no reason to be too tough and not show your emotions. And then the other part of it is you can't do it all. You're not supposed to do it all by yourself, and therefore be resourceful and ask for help and get that help from other people.
Well, thank you. This has been really wonderful, and we are practically at the hour, or past the hour. So I would just want to mention to all of you that we have practically daily webinars all about personal and professional growth that are very important at this time. So on that, I say this tomorrow, Friday, we have one by Suzanne Hill on meditation. Then we have one on what food to eat to make sure you're absolutely healthy. Then we have others on more specific on gender, the cost of domestic violence, or the cost of gender violence that is in the trillions of dollars in some countries. And so those are taxpayers' money. And so why is a pandemic like COVID being so actively taken care of from the governments, and nothing is done on violence? The same, we have another webinar on climate change and issues that can be done personally today. And on that, I want to close and thank you, Sule, again, and all of you for participating, for asking questions. And again, the way to change with an inspiring presentation is to immediately write down at least 3 things you're going to change and you're going to be inspired to do today in the next few minutes that will make you change that action to become more resilient.
Thank you. I put my email down. If you have any further questions, if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to use it. Thank you very much. Bye.